Friends, today's NRI Samay program from Los Angeles brought to you commercial free by listeners like you. Your generous donations make possible for us to stay commercial free, and today's show is pre-recorded. If you have a question for the guest, please send an email to nrisamay@gmail.com. We will follow up with the guest and find the answer for you. Thank you for your support.
Friends, welcome back to NRI Samay. This is Sri Hari, your host for today's show. August 28th of this year marks the 50th anniversary of one of the greatest speeches in the modern era of humankind. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in the midst of the civil rights movement in 1963, gave a speech famously called as "I Have a Dream" from the steps of Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The civil rights movement in U.S. also has a special place in hearts of Indians, as Dr. King said himself that he was inspired by Gandhiji and the non-violent Indian freedom movement. There were hundreds of thousands of people who attended the speech at the Lincoln Memorial. Today we have with us one of those attendees, Nolan Atkinson, trial lawyer and Chief Diversity Officer of Duane Morris, LLP, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We will discuss about the events led up to the day of the speech, its significance, and its relevance in today's world. Mr. Nolan Atkinson, welcome to NRI Samay. Could you please tell us where you were at when Dr. King was giving the speech, "I Have a Dream"?
Okay, friends, we have Mr. Nolan Atkinson with us. He is a trial lawyer and Chief Diversity Officer of Duane Morris, LLP. Nolan, could you please tell us about where you were when Martin Luther King Jr. was giving the speech, "I Have a Dream"?
Yes, I was somewhere among the 250,000 people or so who were gathered for the speech. I had come to Washington in the morning and had been there throughout the day. I came with a group. My college fraternity had sent its elected officers from all over the country to represent the fraternity, and had arrived early in that morning. I believe the speech by Dr. King began sometime in the mid-afternoon. I was in a position where I could hear his words very well. I do not recall being able to actually observe him because I was a good distance back from the podium. But his words were powerful, majestic, and had a certain rhythm to them. And the crowd was very, very much attentive and listening. Usually when you have that many people gathered, folks are doing all sorts of things, but this was a point in the march when everyone listened. They applauded as he would stop, and then he would go on and say more words. They were words that were majestic, as I said, very simple for any to understand, and had a great deal of meaning. That, and I believe one of the things he said, "Our time is now," meaning that for those in the United States who had been denied their freedom, their right of eating in public places, their right to vote, their right to go to school, now was the time to change that. And everyone really believed, I felt, that this was a speech which marked the end of the acceptance of Jim Crow America, or a segregated America, and really ushered in the day when the right of all people to assemble, vote, learn, wherever they chose, had been, at least we had begun to usher in that day. Those changes did not happen immediately, of course, but they did happen over a period of time. The Civil Rights Bill was passed, I believe, in 1964, ushering in public accommodations. There was the Voting Rights Bill in 1965. So it was a very important speech. It was a time when I think the civil rights movement reached a crescendo where it had become unified. All groups were supportive of what was taking place. And it was indeed one of the greatest speeches, if not the greatest speech, in the 20th century.
Okay, excellent. So personally, what was the effect on you? You are one of the audience in that for the speech, inspirational speech.
Well, I was 20 years of age, a college student at Boston University. Was very much a student of political science, government, and interested in civil rights and law. I believe, although I can't swear at this moment, but I believe that the speech had a great impact on me in always including in whatever I have done in the 50 years since then, diversity and inclusion as part of what I wanted to do in whatever position I have held. I've been a lawyer for most of that time, but while I have been a lawyer, I have always tried to inject into my professional life some aspect of fighting for the rights of those who are downtrodden and working to be inclusive of everyone by creating systems that required the presence of all.
Okay, great. And the speech, Dr. King's speech, it was, most of the times now when somebody is playing the speech, they start with, I have a dream, that part of the speech, right? But the speech itself is longer than that. So anything significant you can mention from his speech as an entirety, and what are, I know you mentioned about the civil rights and voting rights, right to assembly, but were there any other specifics that he was pointing it out?
Well, I think the speech was really a historical narrative that began with the Emancipation Proclamation, the recognition that we were gathered in front of the Lincoln Memorial, a discussion of how the Negro was being treated in the United States since that time, I don't have the speech in front of me, but I cannot cite the specific words. But certainly there was a discussion of the issues that had been a part of the civil rights crusade of the 20th century. And so the significance of the speech, and the reason why I think it is one of the greatest speeches, is it because it allows the listener to identify with the best of what the America and the United States were designed to be by its founders. And it combines with that the moral struggle of the Negro, as well as all those others who had been denied civil rights, to achieve equality in this country. And it then concludes with the dream of Dr. King, where he says that one day my 4 little children will be able to eat or break bread with the children of those who have been discriminating. That those weren't his words, but that was the thought process, so that you get the history, the moral fight, the moral struggle, and the dream of how he hoped America could be at its very best. So there's not one segment of the speech that you can cite. It's the entire speech itself, which was really not very long. It's not much longer than the time we've talked on the radio today, where he was able to capture in such a symbolic way all that we would like for this country and for this world to be.
And some of the what built up to that speech, some of the things I at least I know only one thing, which is the incidents with the social activist Rosa Parks, and she did not obey to go and sit in the back side of the of a bus. So that I can think of that. But are there any other incidents that kind of led up to this huge event?
Oh yes, there was the effort to begin integrating public accommodations. Prior, up until this time, if African Americans or blacks wanted to eat lunch in a counter, there was a place that said for whites only and for colored only. And if there was a place where you wanted to get a drink of water at a playground, if you were in certain segments of this country, you could only drink water if you were a black at a place at a water fountain that said for colored only. So in 1963, primarily students began peacefully and non-violently marching to end that kind of discrimination. And during the spring of 1963, they were met, I believe it was in Birmingham, Alabama, with police who had dogs and had fire hoses, and who were putting high-pressure hoses on marchers, and dogs let to attack marchers. And these as they were called, Freedom Riders, were jailed, all done in a non-violent way. You had in 1963 the assassination of a man by the name of Medgar Evers, who was a state NAACP civil rights worker, employee in Mississippi, who, while standing on his front porch, was assassinated. You had the effort of black students to be admitted onto college campuses in the South, who could not be admitted without the presence of federal troops. So all of these things were coming to a crescendo in the United States in the year 1963. And I would add one very important element. For the first time, most of what was going on was televised, so that it was not a local event, but it became a national event and was seen nationwide. And so this raised a great moral issue for Americans. Do we want to be a country that attacks nonviolent demonstrators, or do we want to come and respond to a higher calling? Do we want to consider changing these laws? So there was an effort, and there was an introduction of civil rights legislation in 1963 to provide for public accommodation. And part of that bill was also to say that any person or business that conducted discriminatory practices against African Americans could not receive federal funds. So that if you had a business and you were discriminating, you weren't eligible for federal funds if this legislation had passed. So yes, there were many changes that were being proposed in 1963, and all of this was coming together at the time of the march. So you have a great moral crusade matching up with a political agenda, which I've just listed, at the same time. And I think you mentioned Rosa Parks. That was sort of the beginning, several years earlier, back in the 50s. So we've had for about 6 or 7 years these efforts to bring about change that were in a concentrated, meaningful way. And so the march was, as when I said before, it was the apex of what had been taking place. It was the largest march that had ever occurred in this country. And it was one that brought and caught the attention of everyone.
Friends, NRI Samay is a non-profit independent alternate media from Los Angeles, USA, which brings positive stories from grassroots activists from all corners of India and across the world. NRI Samay does not rely on corporate funding, and our shows are commercial-free. We only rely on your donations. Corporate-funded media is driven by the TRP rating, and profits are blurring the distinction between news and entertainment. Why do our news channels talk so much about cricket, movies, accidents, popular figures' personal lives, babies of heroines, gossips, etc., while they should be covering the struggles of people, inequality in our society, rural issues, and border security issues. Why did our media raise some corruption crusaders to the sky on one day and shut them off completely when graft charges were raised on those corporate sponsors? Media relies so much on the corporate funding and government blessings that they cannot report independently. NRI Samay is different. We don't accept funds from any corporations and hence our shows are commercial free. We completely rely on donations from you. Please consider donating to NRI Samay and please go to nrisamay.com and donate generously. This is the only way together that we can continue NRI Samay. All donations are kept transparent on nrisamay.com. And if you have any questions, please write to nrisamay@gmail.com.
So I would imagine that most of the audience at that march were African Americans, but were there any white folks also there?
I think that is incorrect. I think that while a majority of those present were African American, the march had very strong support from organized labor throughout the country, the United Auto Workers, and many other groups. And these were not just African Americans in those unions. This was the national leadership who were Caucasians or white Americans who fully supported the march. You had the clergy involved, many of whom were part of the Anglican and Catholic churches, all highly supportive of the march. And you had a number of individuals who were white Americans who came. One of the most famous music groups that performed during the march was a group called Peter, Paul, and Mary. And they were extremely popular in the early 60s. It was a trio. All three of them were white Americans. In some of the events leading up to the march, some of the civil rights workers who were killed were white Americans. So this was not a march of just African Americans. This was a march that was really the heart and soul of America, black and white, standing together to bring about change.
Yeah, also you mentioned the Civil Rights Act that came up. So if there is no togetherness, it's almost impossible to bring any political changes. So yeah, I can imagine now. Then let me see. So if somebody is
I didn't quite catch that last thought about it's almost impossible for political change.
To bring the changes that occurred after the speech, which is to bring the civil rights bill. So you need support from all sections of the people, right? So that's
right, and we got that. I mean, that occurred, and that political change, as I said earlier, occurred in 1964 and 65 with the passage of the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah. Suppose if somebody is standing at the same place and at the Lincoln Memorial and giving almost the same speech today, how relevant would that be? And in today's environment, today's what we are seeing, the civil and social system we have now.
I want you to repeat that because I caught some of it, but I didn't catch it all, sir.
Okay, no problem. So if today somebody took a printout of that speech, Dr. King's speech, and they go to Lincoln Memorial and they are giving out this speech to a bunch of friends or people, how relevant would that be in today's environment?
Well, I think that we saw this week when the memorial of the 50th anniversary was celebrated, that there were 100,000 people who came to hear Dr. King's son, other influential persons, and President Obama.
Right.
I think that Dr. King's address was singularly a oratorical accomplishment that is not going to be repeated. But I do think that the need for people to express themselves and continue to seek changes which are needed is something which is just as important today as it was 50 years ago. And I think the changes which folks talked about this week in Washington, the need for jobs, the need to redress grievances in such things as voter ID laws, which are suppressing some's right to vote, and other such activities which are relevant today must be discussed. And I think that's one of the reasons we had a march this week in Washington.
Okay, great. Especially for, Indians can relate to Dr. King's speech and his movement, and because the movement was a peaceful movement, and that's how India also got its independence.
Yeah,
which was led by Mahatma Gandhi. So, do you know? Can you talk a little bit about the relationship, if you are aware of it?
Well, I think that Dr. King was a great disciple of nonviolence, and that he was very much a follower of the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, and that throughout his time on this earth, the great part of his greatness was that he continued to preach nonviolence in the face of violence. I cannot recall the language, but I know that he addressed that in his remarks at the March on Washington, and talked about the fact that we could not allow ourselves to weaken in the face of wrongdoing by responding with violence, but that nonviolence must be the center of our advocacy. And I think that was just such a powerful statement, one that I think is entirely appropriate and relevant, and one that I think was very much a part of the teachings of Gandhi back in the time when India was seeking its independence in the 1940s.
Excellent. So if Dr. King was alive today, what would be, from your perspective, what do you think, what are the top issues, maybe 3 or 4 issues that he would disagree with President Obama?
I think, you're really making me work here, but let me...
I know we did not give any questions to you in advance, and these are all impromptu, so I would...
That's all right. That's all right. I think the whole question, some of the questions that have been addressed in the most recent term by the United States Supreme Court would have been issues that Dr. King would have had interest in. Dr. King did not just limit himself to the rights of the Negro, but he was very much a spokesman against the Vietnam War in the late 60s, and advocated very strongly against involvement in that war. But I think today he would have been concerned about, as I mentioned, voting rights, in some of the legislative acts that have been passed in certain states designed to limit the right to vote by Americans. I think he would have been concerned about why so many African Americans are incarcerated in jails. I think I read somewhere where that number is greater than those who are in college. I think he would have been concerned about attacks on the use of affirmative action in the selection process at colleges across the country, and the fact that those who are in the selection process cannot consider the diversity of individuals. I think he would have been concerned about the rights of those who fall under the category of LGBT, or lesbian, gay, transgender, or bisexual. I think he would have been concerned about the great economic disparity between a larger and larger segment of this country and the very, very wealthy. And the fact that when you go into American cities, you find these huge pockets of people who are living in poverty. And I think he would have been asking himself the question, why? Why is it that this is repeating itself in all of our cities? So yes, there are plenty of issues that Dr. King would have had on his agenda in 2013 were he with us today.
Friends, NRI Samay is a non-profit independent alternate media from Los Angeles, USA, which brings positive stories from grassroots activists from all corners of India and across the world. If you have any interesting episode you would like NRI Samay to cover, we will be happy to do so. NRI Samay would also like to encourage amateur journalists who have a flair for highlighting current events. You can be part of our citizen journalist team. You could cover an important event, interview victims of an atrocity, or document an inspirational story. The idea is to have a mix of experience throughout all parts of the world. preferably supported by an audio or a video clip of your story to be aired, which will be the curtain raiser. You can also submit your opinion articles on important topics to NRI Samay. We will be happy to put it on nrisamay.com in the opinion section. All your work will be credited only to you. And if you're interested, please send an email to nrisamay@gmail.com.
Thanks. You covered a lot of things actually, but what about the foreign policy of the current administration? Do you think he would be concerned about that as well, in terms of how Syria is handled, or how the users of drones, etc.?
The users of what?
Drone planes.
Drones. Okay, yeah, I got you. I believe that he would have spoken out on issues that he thought were morally opposed. I'm saying that poorly, that he was morally in opposition to. I don't think he would have limited himself simply to domestic affairs. I don't think he would have had any hesitancy about speaking out on international affairs if he thought that the United States was in the wrong. What I do not want to say is I think it would be a mistake for any of us to predict how he would have responded if, in fact, he were here today on specific issues, because some of them, like many issues, there are two sides to the issue. And I think I would defer to answering that question as to how he would respond on those two sides if presented with them today.
Absolutely right. I just have last two questions. I know you already gave a lot of time. So I was curious. There were not a lot of because other people also spoke on that day when Dr. King gave the speech, but not a lot of representation from the woman activists, female activists. Do you know if there was activists involved in that movement, female activists?
Do I know whether there were women involved? Could you repeat the last part of your sentence, sir?
So I was curious why not a lot of women spoke on that day.
Right.
But so, do you think there is enough representation as far as the movement, the overall movement is concerned from the woman? And do you know why there would not be a lot of speakers from the woman side?
Well, of course, many things change with the times, and 50 years ago, women had not yet achieved the kind of equality of presence that is mandatory today. I do believe that were we gathered there today, there would have been a much larger presence of women on the stage. I also believe that women, whether they were present or not on the stage, were an integral part of the civil rights movement in 1963 and before, and that movement would not have had the success it had if women were not a part of it. But I cannot say exactly how those changes would be implemented. But there would have been a lot more women there today than there were in 1963.
Okay. And so I have just the last one. I know you already mentioned a lot of things, but probably a repeat question. How did Dr. King's speech change the world? And do you think his dream came true, or maybe partially, like most part of it? What is your opinion?
Like most dreams, I think it certainly we have not achieved the end goals of what he said in 1963. We're much better off. Much has changed in this country, and it would be wrong not to acknowledge those positive changes. There's a lot more work to do. I've already mentioned the areas that I thought would have been ripe for discussion, so I won't repeat those. But I don't think we should celebrate the anniversary of this march without clearly acknowledging that we have an African American president who has been not only elected but reelected. We have African Americans at virtually every level of government, federal, state, and local. We have African Americans involved in business and in all fabrics of the American society. So clearly there has been a major set of accomplishments that have been achieved in these 50 years. But there's more to go. There's more to do. There's much that is undone. And as I said, like any dream, I would say we are on the way to a better country, but we can't stop. We have to keep on working and working together to bring about a further change to achieve the dream.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time. You spent a lot of time with us, and we are honored to have you on NRI Samay. Thanks, Nolan.
Friends, if you liked today's show, please go to youtube.com/NRI Samay and click on the subscribe button. You will get notified every time we publish a new show. And you can also like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, and Google+.